Hey guys, Matt Wellman here. Hope you're having a great day. I want to talk to you today about something that has affected me my entire life, and it wasn't until about 5 or 6 years ago that I really understood what that was. And what made me think about it is we're coming to the end of the school year, and with that, we're getting projects finished. Everyone's ready to be done, ready to have summer, and we're kind of seeing that frustration of students and teachers boil to a head. So, the thing I want to talk about is perfectionism, and I'm here to put it on record. I am a perfectionist, and it drives me and my family members absolutely crazy. So, what does it mean to be a perfectionist? Maybe you've never heard this term. Maybe you've never heard it in a negative way. But I kind of checked out a definition that Wikipedia gave me, and it nailed me spot on. So, perfectionism in psychology is a personality trait characterized by a person's striving for flawlessness and setting excessively high performance standards, accompanied by overly critical self evaluations and concerns regarding others' evaluations. In other words, you're you are really critical about what you do because you judge yourself so harshly, but you also take what people say about you very harshly because you want to get better. You want to be perfect. It's best conceptualized as a multidimensional characteristic, as psychologists agree that there are many positive and negative aspects. In its multi-adaptive form, perfectionism drives people to attempt to achieve an unattainable ideal, and their adaptive perfectionism can sometimes motivate them to reach their goals. In the end, they derive pleasure from doing so. Definitely, anyone I know gets this jolt of excitement from finishing something, from really completing something. And if you're trying to do something really well, you won't finish it unless it is really good. When perfectionists do not reach their goals, they often fall into depression. So this is something that I definitely struggle with. Whenever I get depressed, it's because I am not being productive. And now, for some of you, well, for all of us, productivity is relative. So for me, I work full time, and I have a wife, and I have a son, a newborn son. So being productive could just be going to work, coming home, being with my family, and then going to bed. But no, I like to do other things. I like to write books. I like to play music. I like to work on both of those crafts. So I like to practice my guitar. I like to practice writing and work on projects. And if I'm not doing those things, I don't feel very good about myself. So um, that's that's kind of perfectionism in a nutshell. So where do I struggle with perfectionism? I mean, I really struggle with it everywhere. In writing, if I'm trying to write a story, I might write the same paragraph 100 times. I'll look at it and say, well, Stephen King would never write something like that. And I hold myself to this standard that I believe is not necessarily perfect, but very high. I hold in high regard. As a teacher, I definitely struggle with perfectionism because I'm very hard on myself if I think that I could have shown something better, if I could have taught the lesson better. I go back and I look at that lesson and I really think hard about what are the things that I could have done better. Instead of being able to move on to the next thing, because in education it's always one thing, then the next thing, then the next thing, then the next thing, until you get to the end, which is never. Which is one of the things we try and teach you is be a lifelong learner, right? So that you don't drive your teachers crazy. As a student, because I am always a student, it drives me crazy because I I want to know it the first time and I want to apply it perfectly the first time, which never happens. And I try and tell my students this all the time is if I taught you how to do it and then you could instantly do it, you wouldn't really need me. You could have figured it out on your own. So I'm a lot of this that I'm saying is advice that I've given to myself over the years that I've been trying to internalize. So, and as a musician, this is something that really caused a lot of struggle in my life. When I was in college, I started as a tuba player, and I played tuba. I mean, gosh, since I was in seventh grade until I was a sophomore in college in the Fresno State marching band, Fresno State Wind Ensemble, and then I decided I wanted to be a guitarist. And I had played guitar, but I wanted to study it. I wanted to really immerse myself in it. And so I saw all of my peers who were in the guitar studio playing these really hard pieces, and they were playing them really well, and they sounded beautiful, and I wanted to sound beautiful like they did. And so every time I practiced, I held myself up to that standard, and it really gave me a negative self-image, because they were playing this kind of music. They were playing classical and flamenco guitar for years before they even came to college, whereas I was 2 years into college moving instruments. So in a lot of regards, I would say that I held myself up to a standard that was too high. But I'm going to come back to that. So the first time I was ever called a perfectionist in a negative way, my family has kind of a running joke that it's, oh, we're perfectionists and it just takes us a long time to do stuff. But the first time someone actually said it and it was like, oh, this is negative? What does that mean? I had the good fortune of meeting and getting to know a producer by the name of Paul Aaron. And I remember when I first met him, I was really passionate about this writing that I was doing. My friend and we'd been writing screenplays, and we were super excited about it. You could see the energy and the passion in our eyes, but he says to me, within the first meeting, he says, "Man, it's got to be hard to be such a perfectionist." And that really took me by surprise. What does that mean? Because frankly, whenever someone had called me a perfectionist before, it was, oh, Matt, he like gets down and he looks at what he's doing and he focuses on it until it's done and he finishes whatever he's trying to do. So it was always said to me in a positive light before this had happened. And when I asked him about it, he basically said, well, you're so passionate about it, but there's no product. You're really passionate about this writing you're doing. Where is it? I want to see it, but you're not done. So you need to take a step back and figure out how to finish this, because all the passion in the world doesn't mean anything if you never have a product to present. So that was my first kind of eye-opening, oh, being a perfectionist can be a bad thing. And then in self-reflection, realizing that I had that trait all along, that being a perfectionist has been part of my entire life, and I've struggled with it. But that was the first time it was kind of, hey, maybe you need to think about this in another way. The next time was actually, I needed a reference letter from a colleague, and I remember the principal at one of the schools I was applying to called them, and in their questioning, one of the questions was, what is Mr. Wellman's biggest fault as an employee? And the response was, he's a perfectionist. And from an employer's point of view, that makes a lot of sense. You would want to know that because for two reasons. I think it's kind of like a forward-handed insult. If instead of a backhanded compliment, it's a forward-handed insult. It says to the employer that this employee is really takes a lot of pride in their work and takes a lot of steps to make sure that they do good work. But the other thing it says to an employer is, be careful because things might not get done. And I've certainly had that problem, not necessarily in teaching, but it's hard to get stuff done when you're so focused on this unattainable idea of perfection. So I want to talk a little bit more about that. I always considered it a positive because it always made me push my limits. So when I'm going to go back to talking about changing the instrument I was playing in college. I went from a tubist to a guitar player, and comparing myself to these other guys who were, by all rights, much better than I was, made me get better so much faster, because suddenly I'm competing with people who have 3 to 5 years more experience doing something than I do. And was I actually in competition with them? Not really, not socially, not we weren't trash talking or anything. It was just I wanted to be as good as they were. So I put myself in competition with them so that I was constantly comparing myself to them. So like I said before, it gave me a negative self-image, and that's true. But I gained a tremendous amount from that, because it made me work harder, because I saw myself as so much less than these other guys, and I wanted to be up at the same level with them. So on the flip side of that, as a perfectionist, I'm going to attribute this to perfectionism, and maybe it's not that, but I tend to be very judgmental, and that is to say that if someone says that this is what they do, and it's really good, I want to emulate that. I want to emulate people who do good work. But if someone doesn't do as good a work as I hold as the standard that I would hold would be for that work, I tend to think very negatively about that. And then by the same token, I hold myself to those same standards, if not higher. If my work isn't as good as or better than someone I think who does very good work, it's trash. Whatever I'm doing is trash, and it's not really fair to myself either. So that's something rough for perfectionists. The other thing about being a perfectionist is you're very single-minded, and I had kind of mentioned that. Single-minded means kind of the opposite of ADD. So instead of being like all over the place wanting to do 100 things at once, I do want to do 100 things at once, but I'm so focused on one thing that I lose track of the bigger picture. So, for example, I remember I love playing heavy metal. I love playing heavy metal on my electric guitar, and again, because I started playing guitar quite a bit later than a lot of my peers, I didn't get a lot of the guys I know. They started playing electric guitar long before they started playing, say, classical or flamenco guitar. I was the opposite. I started playing classical guitar, and then later, only later did I get into more popular music genres. So I remember wanting to start this heavy metal band with a friend of mine, and sitting down and practicing this opening lick from a Racer X song, Technical Difficulties. And I sat down, and I remember I was in my apartment in Las Vegas playing Technical Difficulties. As soon as I woke up, I had my electric guitar out and I was playing. I'd go to work, go teach at the music store, come home, eat dinner, we'd go to the gym, and then again, boom, I'm playing Technical Difficulties. And again, this was probably a piece that was way above my ability at the time, but I was getting better, and then suddenly I realized that weeks had gone by, and I hadn't done anything else. Like, I wanted to start this band with this guy, and I didn't play with him ever. We didn't go looking for other musicians. We didn't write music together. All I was doing was practicing this piece because I thought it would make me better. Now, I think it did make me better in some ways, but I was so single-minded on that notion that I lost track of that bigger picture. And if I go back to writing, I've written the first half of the same book 3 times now. And again, I think every time I do it, it gets better. It gets better for sure, at least in my eyes. But to go back to what Paul said to me several years ago, very passionate about a project that has no product. So Got to try and take my own advice there and get that product done so that it doesn't just exist in my mind. I want other people to see that too, and I imagine that other perfectionists feel the same way. You want to see your work come to life. So the reason I wanted to make this video is because I've had, like I said in the beginning, we're coming to the end of the school year. I've got student performances. Some of them for the very first time ever. Some of them it's just another performance that they're going to do. So I have two stories. The first is about a student performance. This particular student has performed many times in front of bigger crowds, and she did her performance, and it sounded great. It really sounded great. This person is got a lot of talent for music, but you could tell it wasn't to her standard. Definitely wasn't to her standard, and there's a lot of factors that I think go into that. For example, it's not every day that you play directly in front of your peers. Usually, as a student, elementary, middle school, high school student, there's a lot of parents in the audience. Maybe you think parents are more forgiving than your peers, because our peers tend to be the most critical of our work. So I think this might have gotten to her and made her feel like she could have done so much better, and there were all these external factors that just didn't make this performance an enjoyable experience for her. And that's the reality of performance, as I've learned from hundreds of thousands of hours of performance, is that something new is always going to come up to mess you up and make this performance not your best. And I remember in college we used to say you're only as good as your last performance, which is kind of heart-wrenching. I mean, it's true in some regards because the audience that comes to see you, they only know you from the last performance they saw. So in a business sense, that makes sense. You want to think, well, yeah, you want to make sure that you do your best at every performance. But to wrap your entire self-worth into that one performance is killer. You have to understand the factors that went into it, and you have to ask yourself, did I do my best given the circumstances? And if you put yourself out there and you were vulnerable and you really tried your best, then yeah, the answer is you did give your best. And that's all that anybody can ask for. We're all gonna have you're always gonna have a bad show every once in a while. You might even have a bad string of shows, but you'll recover. You'll get better. So to that student, I want to say, you did great. Keep it up. You have at least one more performance this year, and it's going to go great. And you'll keep growing. You'll keep growing. Continue to be critical of yourself, but know when to give yourself a break too. So the second student I had that I was concerned with being a perfectionist was this. She hasn't done her performance yet. This was a story of performance anxiety, and we're doing a particular project right now where students have paired off into guitar players and singers, and this student didn't really want to sing because she didn't like the sound of her voice. So I can relate. I didn't like the sound of my voice for a very long time. I had a lot of people tell me that I had a great voice and they liked the sound of my voice, but it's a much different thing to hear yourself recorded and like yourself. And I think especially middle school students struggle with just liking themselves. High school students, people in their early 20s just struggle with liking themselves. And I asked, is the reason you don't want to sing because you don't sound like the people that you like as singers? And she said, yeah. And that hit home for me because, frankly, that was one of the reasons that I didn't want to sing. I had a really great friend who I did a YouTube video with earlier this year named Mike Fazio, who I think is a fantastic singer. And I didn't think of myself as a very good singer because I just compared myself to the way that he sounded. now looking back, and I think if anyone listened to the two of us sing side by side, they'd say, well, you guys sound totally different, and you're both good or bad for these different reasons. But it's really hard to compare yourself to someone else in that regard. So the advice I gave this student was, that person that you like, that person whose voice you like, that person's voice already exists and people like it. You're not going to make the world better by mimicking that person's voice. You want to have your own voice. So this is something that we talk a lot about in school, is be yourself. Everyone else is already taken, which is kind of pop psychology for only you can be you. So after we talked for a little while, and I said, we talked about recording her voice, and she had done some YouTube videos, and I kind of explained to her, it's about you being you, not you being someone else. So, and she said that she felt a lot better after that. I hope she did, because I think she has a great voice, really do. And when she puts her best foot forward, it sounds really good, and there's a lot of room to grow there. And she doesn't need to sound like anyone else. It's like I said, she sounds great. So, how do we overcome being a perfectionist? The short answer is you don't. I'm 32. I've always been a perfectionist, and I always will be a perfectionist. The thing that you have to realize, that it's a personality trait, and you have to learn how to deal with it. And I think everyone is a perfectionist to some extent in some area. So, as I'm thinking about strategies here, the thing that I think about is we have to realize that we're all students in some way, and that striving for perfection in whatever we're doing is really just an acknowledgement that we can get better and wanting to get better. If we didn't want to get better, we wouldn't be perfectionists. We'd just blow it off and then go on to the next thing, which I do all the time too. If I don't care about something, I'll blow it off. I'll do the bare minimum work and then go on to the next thing. But it's when you really care about doing something right that this perfectionist kicks in, and every mistake becomes a learning opportunity that you can't get over. You can't ever get to this end goal of this product. You just never get there. So, being a student and realizing that mistakes are places where we are avenues with which we can get better. And I think a lot of us perfectionists will do that intrinsically. Okay, I made a mistake. I know how I'll get better, and then that intense focus kicks in, and it's just guns a-blazing. How can I get better at that one thing? Well, we have to pull away from that too, because time management becomes a huge issue for me, and I think a lot of other perfectionists. So we want to set goals, and like I said in the definition, we want to set goals that are reasonable. Setting high goals are great, and we want to try and achieve those. I'm sure that I will always set goals that are way too high for myself, and then strive to achieve them, and feel depressed when I don't. But if I realize that I set that goal too high, and I made it further than I would have had I set the goal too low, it requires this self-reflection. How can I get past what I perceive as a failure and understand it for the success that it really was? And then one thing that I've started to do that has really helped me is, instead of setting a volume limit, so for example, if I'm writing, I know a lot of guys who they'll write 1,000 words a day, or they'll write 2,000 words a day, or some guys, they'll only write 500 words a day. That is really difficult for me, because if I sit down and I start writing, one of two things will happen. The first, I'll sit there and I'll revise, and all I will do is revise, and there might be 100 new words the whole time. So, boom, already feel like a failure. Or Number two is I'll get on a roll and I won't leave my computer ever. I'll just type through the night, realize that a day's gone by and I'm late for work. And both of those things can be negative. So a time limit is a much better solution for me, and I think for a lot of people. We want to make sure that we can get on with our lives and feel okay moving on to the next thing, so that we're not ultra focused on this one thing forever and ever and ever and ever. So I actually take my phone, and I go through and start. I just have alarms. I have you can't really see it, but I have like 50 alarms, and all of them are just, I know when this alarm goes off, it's time to go to the next thing. When this alarm goes off, it's time to go to the next thing. Or I might set like a 2-hour block and then set timers in between that block so that I know, okay, now I can get up and I can go do something else. Or, it's okay for me to get a drink now. I'm not just avoiding my task, because that's another thing is if I'm struggling to do something, I can't think of the perfect thing I need to do to make sure that this is right. I'll start exhibiting avoidance behaviors, which is like, oh, I need to use the bathroom when I don't really need to. Oh, I need to get a drink when it's not really that pressing. Oh, I need some fresh air. I'll walk around outside. And all I'm doing is just getting myself away from the thing that I'm struggling doing when I just wish it were easy. And nothing worth doing is ever easy. So those are strategies for time management when you're dealing with goal setting. And allow yourself to be done. So when I've said that I've rewritten the same first half of a book 3 times now, I gotta allow myself to be done. And yeah, I can get better at that. I'm sure that I could write that story better the next 100 times that I write it. But the problem is, if I write the first half of the book 100 times, I never finish the book, and then I've never done anything. There's no product ever. No one ever knows that I wrote a book, which is not what I want. I want the opposite. I want lots of people to know that I wrote a book, and I want them to like the book that I wrote, and the music that I write or play, or the videos that I make. And no one would ever know that if I never allowed myself to be done. And that's a struggle for. I think it's a struggle for everyone, not just perfectionists, or it's that part of perfectionism that everybody has. And again, perfectionism doesn't go away. It's not something that you can cure, and I don't think it's something that I would want to cure even if I could, because there are so many positive things about it. I have learned so many skills to a varying degree because I was able to intensely focus on them and compare myself to people who were, by all rights, much better than I was, to push me forward and make me competitive. Being competitive is really important. But within yourself, you want to be the one who's competitive. You want to be the one saying, I can do this better. I see that this person is really good. I need to catch up to them. I'm going to catch up to them. Instead of this, spy versus spy, who's gonna beat the other person. You just want to make sure that if this is the person you're comparing yourself to, and you want to keep going, you want it to be like this until all of a sudden now you're up here. And if you have a healthy relationship with that person, maybe they'll start to compete, and then if you're competing together, you're both getting better together. And that's really a special environment when you can create that, where it's healthy and it's friendly. And I think perfectionism can really foster that sort of social relationship. Anyway, this kind of turned into a vlog, but I hope you got something out of it. If you're a perfectionist and you want to share your perfectionist story with me, I know that I would love to talk to other people who are perfectionists, because honestly, sometimes I feel like I'm by myself and I'm just slamming my head against the wall, thinking about things that I might never do because I just can't get past the first or second step. Leave me a comment. I'd love to talk to you about it. If you want to see more of me, go ahead and subscribe down there and give me a like. It really helps me out. That's it for me today. I'm Matt Wellman, and I hope to see you soon.